Hi, everybody. My name is John. I'm from Crossroads Church, and I want to talk a little bit about Ezekiel 38 today. A lot of people have been talking about Ezekiel 38 and what's going on in Palestine and with Israel right now in this war, trying to find comparisons to, the end times and biblical prophecy. Are we starting to see biblical prophecy come to pass? So I thought I would try to, for those who are not sure what these terms mean, like Gog and Magog and all of that, I thought I would put together a quick video to try to explain what nations these names represent. And we're going to try to compare it to what's going on in the world today to see if indeed there is a parallel to us actually living in potential biblical prophecy coming to pass. So it says in Ezekiel chapter 38, Ezekiel was a prophet, and God spoke to him, and he says, "The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man," meaning Ezekiel, "set your face against Gog in the land of Magog, the chief priest of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him and say, This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses and your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Phut, P-U-T, but it's pronounced P-H-U-T, will be with them, with all their shields and helmets. Also Gomer, with all its troops, and Bet Togarmah from the far north, with all of its troops, and the many nations will be with you." Now, who or what is a Magog? What we know Persia represents Iran in today's world, but what's Cush and Put or Foot, P-H-U-T, Foot? Where do these names come from? What countries do they represent? And what's actually happening here? Well, in order to know who the characters are in these first 6 verses of Ezekiel, we need to go back to the book of Genesis, after the flood in Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 and 2, where it says, "These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood." It says, "The sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, and Meshech, and Tyrus, or Tiris." Now we see some of the names that were mentioned just now as sons of Japheth. They were basically the grandsons of Noah. So now we're getting somewhere. Now, where did they settle? What nations do they represent? Well, Gomer, which is Ezekiel mentions in 38:6, it says also Gomer with all its troops. So who's Gomer? It's believed that Gomer settled in what is known as modern day Turkey after the flood, but he didn't remain there. Actually, biblical terms, Turkey in the New Testament, Turkey was Galatia, okay? And Josephus records that the people of Galatia in his period of time, 93 AD, were known as Gauls or Galatians. But before that, they were actually known as Gomerites, as being descendants of Gomer. Now they migrated from this also as the centuries went, leading up to the times of Jesus, obviously. They migrated from there, they went westward towards Western Europe, and they settled in France and in Spain. Now, some of the Gomerites from there, from France, went on and migrated to what is now called Wales. You may have heard the Duchess of Wales, okay? And the Welsh believe that the descendants of Gomer landed in the Isles of the in the Britain Isles, the British Islands, Great Britain, basically, I guess you could say, from France about 300 years after the flood. So basically, the Gomerites make up Western Europe, okay? They make up uh, France, Spain, Italy became part of their territory, and they settled in Wales and England. Okay, so if you're from Western Europe, if your ancestry comes from the western part of Europe, there's a going by what the Bible teaches, we would be, because my family came from Europe, and we would be descendants of Japheth. Okay, as far as from the line of Noah. Now Japheth had another son named Magog. It's believed that he went straight north towards Russia, and he settled around the Ukraine and Romania, which we see, Ukraine is big in the news too today. And Magog is mentioned in Ezekiel. So we know that to be approximately around Ukraine or Romania. So we're talking around the regions of Russia or the former Soviet Union. Now we also see the name Madai mentioned. Okay, Madai is an ancestor of the modern day Iranians, which was called Persia. Now Madai became known as the Medes. Now they weren't the only settlers in Persia and Iran. We're going to see it as we go along because it was the Persian Mede Empire. Okay, so the Madais went with the Persians. They actually became the Medes. And in 1935, the country became known as Iran, where they settled. We're going to talk more about the Persian and the Medes as we go along, looking at the other children of, or the other grandchildren of Noah. So Japheth then had a son named Javan, and it's believed that that's Hebrew for Greece, and he would have settled around the Grecian islands. Japheth had a son named Tubal, who Ezekiel mentions, along with Gog and Meshech, who we're going to mention next. The Romans called the land of Tubal Iberia, which later became known as the Soviet Union or the state of Georgia. Okay, within the Soviet Union. And then we see Meshech, who was mentioned also by Ezekiel, which was the ancient name for Moscow, which we know to be the capital of Russia. So we can look at Japheth's other sons of Magog, Madai, and Tubal and Meshech, basically settling in Eastern Europe towards the very western part of Asia, which created at one time the Soviet Union. So Gog and Magog has become known to relate as the country of Russia because of where Magog settled and where Meshech settled and where Tubal settled. They all settled along the borders of what was once known as the Soviet Union. Okay, so that's, if you're from Russia, these would be your ancestors, biblically speaking. Okay, now let's go on, and it says in verse 6, the sons of Ham were Cush, Egypt, Phut, P-U-T, and Canaan. Now Ham's son Cush was the Hebrew word for Ethiopia. It's believed that he settled and his descendants settled along the eastern coast of the continent of Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, all around that coast. Then there's Ham had a son named Mitzrayim, which was the Hebrew word for Egypt, who also settled in the continent of Africa, which would have been around the country of Egypt. Ham had a son named P-U-T, pronounced P-H-U-T, so I'm guessing Phut, the name of Noah's next grandson. And he settled in Libya, okay? Now we're going to talk about Canaan, okay? Canaan is very big, it's very important. Ham had a son named Canaan. His Hebrew name for the region, that was the region, was called the land of Canaan. That's where he settled. And the Romans renamed that land by the Mediterranean there. Renamed it Palestine. Okay, and Palestine comes from the Roman Empire. They called it Palestine, and the state of Palestine is obviously there. The modern day nation of Israel is there, and it's also the nation of Jordan is around there. And basically, to describe what's going on in Israel with the fighting and everything, we could read where 7 chapters later, when Abram is born, and who became Abraham, and God told Abram at this point in Genesis 17:8, the whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give you as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Now, I'm going to get into where Abraham originally came from and who he descended from as we go along. But I just want to just bring out the point that Abraham lived around Babylonia at that point in the city called okay, which is actually in modern day Iraq. And God called him from there to go and live in the land of Canaan as a foreigner. And he promised him that his descendants would eventually have possession of this land. And that land was taken from Palestine, was taken from Canaan. Okay? Now, the Canaanite descendants are now fighting with basically the descendants of Shem, because that's who Abraham came from. And they're fighting over the land because it originally belonged to Canaan. And the descendants of Shem, which are Israel, are now settled there. And from the very beginning, when this first happened at the Battle of Jericho to 2023, the fighting for that land has not stopped. Okay? Now in Genesis 10:22, we're going to see how this all fits in. The sons of Shem, who was the son of Noah, was Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, remember that name, Lud, and Aram. Shem's son Elam is the ancient name for Persia, and he settled in Iran. Now, there was two basically cousins that settled in that area, if you go by this, because there was Japheth's son Madai, and now we see that Shem's son Elam settled in that area, and they became the Persian Mede Empire at one point in time, which is today's Iran. Okay? Shem had another son named Ashur, and where he settled, it became known as Assyria. All right? Shem then had a son named Arphaxad. Abraham is a descendant of Arphaxad from Shem's line, which means Israel comes from Jacob, comes from Arphaxad, the line of Shem. Okay? So basically, where they settled was right around Babylonia and Babylon, along, I guess, the coast by the Tigris rivers over there by Iraq. And God called Abraham to leave his family from there, from that region where his ancestors came from, to go to the land of Canaan. And God was going to give Canaan to Shem's descendants. Okay? Shem's son Lud was an ancestor of the Lydians. And Lydia is what's now known as Western Turkey. Then Shem had a son named Aram, which is the Hebrew way for Syria. Now, I'm going to bring out a point. If your ancestry, like I said, comes from Eastern, Western Europe, you would have to just line up to whatever grandson of Noah where they settled. If you're Italian, if you're that would be Western Europe. You would have been from the Gomerites. The founding fathers of the United States. Now they say the United States, obviously it's not mentioned in the Bible, but if you go by our heritage, our ancestry, we are, because the founding fathers of the United States, the 13 colonies, came from England. Okay, all right. So the Pilgrims. Okay, now Wales and England, like we said, the British Isles, were descendants of Gomer, who was the son of Japheth. So the people in the United States would fall in line with the descendants of Japheth because they migrated from England into the New World. Okay? So that being said now, let's reread Ezekiel 38, and I'm going to use modern day countries in the place of the names that were originally used. And we'll see how this makes sense. The word of the Lord came to me, Ezekiel 38. Son of man, set your face against Gog, who was the leader, the king of the time, in the land of Magog, which is believed to be Russia because of the names that are going to be mentioned, all settled around the areas known as the former Soviet Union. So we're just going to say Russia for now, okay? As a potential country that this could be referring to. So in the land of Russia, the chief priest of Meshech, which would have been Moscow, and Tubal, which makes up Georgia, the state of Georgia around the Soviet Union, and prophesy against them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm against you, God, chief priest of Meshach, basically the Soviet Union, and Tubal, and I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen, fully armed, and a great horde with a large and small shield, all of them brandishing swords. Now, I want to stop for a second because I want you to notice that it says, I will turn you around. God's going to turn them around and put a hook in their jaw, okay, to turn them around, as if to say they're going to be looking in one direction and they're going to do a sharp turn. God's going to sharply turn them, which makes me think that if it is Russia, because for centuries, Russia never really got involved with the Israeli and the Palestinian or the Arab conflicts, okay? But it makes you think that God's going to put a hook in their mouth, which means there may be a situation, whether it be political or for whatever the reason, where there's going to be a situation that's going to force Russia to turn and look at Israel and say, I'm going to conquer them. Because up until current times, they never really focused on that region. Okay, they never got involved with that. But we're going to see what's going on in today's world with Russia also. And not just with the Ukraine, but with the Middle East as we talk. So it's almost like God is going to basically set this country up by putting a hook in their mouth to put Israel in their sights so that they can go in and plunder it. Okay? Now, it goes on to say in verse 5, Persia, which we just said was Iran, Cush, which would be Ethiopia or the east coast of the continent of Africa, Foot, which is Libya, these are the countries that we're mentioning now, will be with them, all the shields and helmets. Also Goma, which we established to be basically Western Europe, and potentially, because our ancestors came from Western Europe, the United States, okay, with all its troops, and Bet Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, and the many nations with you. Basically, what it's saying is every nation on every continent on this earth is going to turn and charge against Israel in the battle, what is going to be known as Armageddon. Now, how does this relate to the current war in Palestine? Well, indirectly it doesn't, because I don't believe that this is the Battle of Armageddon. But let's look at the players. Let's look at what these countries and where they are in the world today and what's going on with them to see if there's any parallels here, if there's anything that we can make sense out of. Currently, Russia and Iran actually share a close economic and military alliance. Russia and Iran are alliance. So Magog and Persia are actually friends right now, militarily wise and economically wise. So we see a marriage. So right there, we see two nations mentioned in Ezekiel 38 that are friendly towards each other, with one of them bent on the destruction of Israel. Okay? Now, that being said, every nation in the world that one time supported Israel, in 2023, the United States is the only nation that remains 100% committed to defending Israel, okay? Whether it be militarily, economically, whatever the case may be. But in the political climate that we have in this country now, in the United States, where people in Congress, known as the Squad, which blows my mind how they even got elected, but we have a squad that basically sides with Palestine, okay? And they keep getting reelected. And they are far left progressives, and they got the votes. And it just shows me that if the United States continues to align themselves, future generations, our kids and our kids' kids, start to think along the way that the squad is thinking, they're going to become the majority of Congress. And when that happens, okay, when that happens, it's very possible that the USA may withdraw its support of Israel and we will turn on them because it says every country is going to turn on them. So, that being said, can I look at the world today, Congress in the United States, what's going on with Russia and Iran, battling over the Ukraine? Russia wants their control back. When I look at all the players, all the nations of what's going on in the world today, when I look at the moral decline, the biblical moral value decline that's going on in the world, I could say unfoundedly yes. The pieces on God's chessboard, in my opinion, are being set up in order to have this great battle that's going to come. I believe personally that Jesus is going to be coming more sooner than later, which will bring on this battle of Armageddon. So let's see what Ezekiel says is going to happen in this battle as I close. It says in verse 17 of Ezekiel 38, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You are the one I spoke of in former days by my servants, the prophets of Israel. At that time, they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. He's talking about Gog and all the nations now. And this is what would happen in that day when Gog attacks the land of Israel. God is speaking. My hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. My zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people of the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. And the mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground, and I will summon a sword against Gog and all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. And every man's sword will be against his own brother, and I will execute judgment on them with plagues and bloodshed. And I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstorm, burning sulfur on him and on all his troops and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. And then they will know that I am the Lord. And like I said, I think it's safe to say that the pieces for this to happen are definitely being put in motion. And it's funny that on Saturday, October 7th, when Hamas attacked Israel, they attacked them with weapons that were bought because of the United States' hasty retreat from Afghanistan, leaving our weapons behind. And the weapons we left behind are actually being used by Hamas. They were sold. So it's funny that Afghanistan took our weapons and gave it to other terrorists to attack to attack Israel. And on that same exact day, there was, I believe, a 6.5 earthquake in Afghanistan that killed over 2,400 people. I just find that to be very coincidental that that same day Afghanistan suffered such a horrible earthquake. God's not pleased, God's not happy, and Israel will always be the apple of God's eye. And I do believe that Jesus is coming soon. Thanks for tuning in.